She was married to Ali ibn Abi Talib, her cousin and one of the earliest believers in Islam. Their marriage was simple and humble. The Prophet himself oversaw the arrangements, and the wedding took place without extravagance or unnecessary display. Fatima's dowry was small, and their home was modest, furnished with only the bare essentials: a simple bed, a water skin, and a few basic utensils. Yet in that simplicity lay great blessings, for their home was filled with love, faith, and contentment. Life as the wife of Ali was not easy. They were not wealthy, and both worked hard to support their household. Fatima would grind grain until her hands became blistered and carry water until her shoulders ached. She did not complain, for she understood that this life was a test and that her reward was with Allah. She supported Ali in his duties and cared for their home with devotion. In the evenings, they would pray together and speak of the blessings of faith. Their marriage was built on mutual respect and shared values, and they faced their struggles together with patience and gratitude. In Madinah, Fatima also continued to serve her father and the Muslim community. She would visit him often, bringing food or simply sitting with him in conversation. The Prophet loved her dearly and treated her with a level of honor that was rare for women in that time. Whenever she entered the room, he would rise to greet her, kiss her forehead, and seat her beside him. This was not just a display of love, but also a lesson to the community about the respect and value of women in Islam. The years in Madinah were also marked by the battles that shaped the early Muslim community. When the Muslims faced their enemies at Badr, Uhud, and Khandak, Ali was often at the forefront of the fighting, defending the faith with courage. Fatima played her part as well, tending to the wounded, preparing food for the fighters, and offering words of comfort to those who had lost loved ones. She shared in the fears and hopes of the Muslims, her heart always with her family and her faith. One of the most difficult moments for her came after the Battle of Uhud. The Muslims had suffered heavy losses, and her father was injured. Fatima tended to his wounds herself, bringing water and cleaning the blood from his face. When the bleeding would not stop, she burned a piece of cloth and pressed the ashes to the wound to seal it. Her hands worked with skill and care, her heart steady even in the face of pain and danger. It was in moments like these that her strength and devotion became clear to all who knew her. Life in Madinah was a mixture of hardship and blessings. Fatima had little in terms of worldly comfort, but she had a family bound together by love and faith. She became a mother during these years, giving birth to Hasan and later Hussein, both of whom would become beloved to the Prophet and central figures in Islamic history. Her children grew up in a home where the love of Allah was the foundation of every action, and where service to others was a daily practice. Fatima taught them through her example, showing them the values of humility, generosity, and steadfastness. Even in the face of poverty, Fatima never turned away someone in need. If a poor person came to her door, she would give them whatever she could, even if it meant going without herself. Her heart was generous, and she saw every act of giving as a way to draw closer to Allah. The people of Madinah came to know her as a woman of kindness and piety, someone who lived for her faith and for the service of others. As the years passed, Fatima's role as a wife, mother, and daughter became more deeply intertwined with the life of the Prophet and the growing Muslim community. Her presence was a source of comfort to her father, a support to her husband, and an example to all who sought to live a life of righteousness. The trials of her early years had shaped her into a woman of remarkable strength, and the blessings of Madinah had deepened her faith. The migration had been a turning point not only for the Muslim Ummah, but also for Fatima herself. It had taken her from the shadow of persecution in Makkah to the hope of a new life in Madinah. Yet she knew that the path ahead would not be without its challenges. The mission of her father was far from over, and the trials of the believers were not yet behind them. Fatima was ready to face whatever came next, her heart anchored in the faith she had carried since childhood, her life a testament to the beauty of patience and devotion life as a mother and devoted believer. The years in Madinah brought Fatima bint Muhammad into a new stage of life. She was no longer only the devoted daughter of the Messenger of Allah, but also the wife of Ali ibn Abi Talib and the mother of a growing family. The home she shared with Ali was simple and humble, yet it was filled with the warmth of love and the light of faith. It was in this modest dwelling that she would raise her children and continue to live a life of sacrifice and devotion to Allah. Her first child, Hazrat, was born in the 3rd year after the Hijrah. When the Prophet Muhammad heard of his birth, he came to the home of Fatima and Ali with great joy. He took the newborn into his arms, recited the adhan in his ear, and named him Hazrat as commanded by Allah. The Prophet loved Hazrat dearly, and would often carry him in his arms and speak of his virtues even as a child. Not long after, Fatima gave birth to her second son, Hussein. The Prophet's love for Hussein was as deep as for Hazrat. He would say that Hazrat and Hussein were the leaders of the youth of paradise. Fatima's heart overflowed with gratitude to Allah for these blessings, but she also knew that raising children was a trust and a responsibility that required patience and dedication. Fatima's life as a mother was far from easy. The work in her home was heavy, and she did it all herself. She would grind grain until her hands blistered, carry water until her shoulders ached, and sweep the floors of her home with her own hands. She would rise before dawn to prepare her family for the day and spend much of her time caring for her children, teaching them the words of the Quran and guiding them to good manners. Her life was one of constant service, yet she never complained. She found joy in fulfilling her duties and in knowing that her efforts were for the sake of Allah. Her days were also filled with worship. Fatima was deeply committed to her prayers, never neglecting them no matter how busy or tired she was. She was known for her long nights in prayer, standing in devotion to Allah while the rest of her household slept. She would often pray not only for herself and her family, but for the entire Muslim Ummah. Her generosity extended beyond material things, as she gave her time, her care, and her supplications to others. This devotion and selflessness were qualities that everyone in Madinah recognized and heard. Despite the poverty of her home, Fatima was never attached to worldly possessions. One famous incident tells of a day when she and Ali had only one piece of bread to eat. Before they could eat it, a hungry man came to their door asking for food. Without hesitation, Fatima gave him the bread. On another occasion, a poor person came asking for clothing, and she gave away her own garment. Such acts were not done to be seen by others, but purely for the sake of Allah. Her life was a reflection of the Quranic verse that says they give food in spite of their own need to the needy, the orphan, and the captive, saying, "We feed you for the sake of Allah alone," seeking neither reward nor thanks. Her children grew up witnessing these acts of kindness and generosity, learning from their mother's example. Hazrat and Hussein were often seen playing around the mosque while the Prophet watched over them with affection. Fatima would bring them to see their grandfather, and the bond between the Prophet and his grandsons was strong. The Messenger of Allah would carry them on his shoulders, kiss them, and make dua for them. Fatima cherished these moments, knowing how much love her father had for her children. The life of the Muslims in Madinah, however, was not free from hardship. The battles of Badr, Uhud, and Khandak had already shown the dangers the community faced. During these times, Fatima played her part in supporting the Muslim cause. She would tend to the wounded, bring water to the fighters, and comfort the families of those who had been martyred. After the Battle of Uhud, she cared for her father's injuries with her own hands, stopping the bleeding and ensuring he was safe. Her courage in moments of crisis was a source of strength for those around her. Her relationship with her father remained as close as ever. Whenever the Prophet returned from a journey, he would go to the mosque first and then come directly to her home. When she visited him, he would stand to greet her, kiss her forehead, and seat her beside him. He would often remind the companions of her virtues, saying, "Fatima is a part of me, and whoever makes her angry makes me angry." These words were not mere expressions of affection, but a clear sign of the high status she held in his heart and in. The sight of Fatima also had a strong and supportive relationship with her husband, Ali. Though they faced the difficulties of poverty and hard work, their bond remained strong. Ali admired her patience and devotion, while she respected his courage and loyalty. They shared in their struggles, and their marriage was built on mutual respect, faith, and understanding. When disputes arose, they would seek guidance from the Prophet, who would advise them with wisdom and kindness. This balance in their relationship became an example for Muslim couples in generations to come. The Prophet would sometimes visit Fatima and find her grinding grain or working with her hands. On one occasion, seeing her fatigue, he advised. The birth and early life in the heart of Makkah, at a time when the city was a bustling center of trade and idol worship, a light was about to shine in the household of the most noble man, Muhammad ibn Abdullah, the messenger of Allah. It was the 5th year before prophethood, around the year 605 CE, when Fatima, the youngest daughter of Prophet Muhammad, and Khadija bint Khuwaylid, RIA, was born. Her arrival brought joy into a household already known for its purity and dignity. Unlike most homes in Makkah, where idols stood in every corner, the house of Muhammad was free from any form of shirk. It was a home of kindness, truthfulness, and compassion. Fatima, was born during a time when the Quraysh, the dominant tribe of Makkah, were still allies to Muhammad. The message of Islam had not yet been revealed, but the qualities that made him beloved among the people were already well known. He was called Al-Amin, the trustworthy, and Al-Sadiq, the truthful. Her mother, Khadija, was a woman of great wisdom, wealth, and devotion, who raised her children with deep love and care. Fatima grew up surrounded by the affection of her 3 elder sisters, Zainab, Ruqayya, and Kulthum. But she was different from the start, more reserved, yet deeply attached to her parents. When she was just 5 years old, the life she knew began to change forever. Her father, Muhammad received the first revelation from Allah in the cave of Hira. He returned home trembling and deeply moved by the experience, and Khadija, comforted him. That day marked the beginning of Islam, and also the beginning of trials for the family. As her father called people to the worship of one God, many among the Quraysh turned against him. Those who once respected him began to insult, ridicule, and harm him. Fatima, though still a child, saw these changes with her own eyes. The streets of Makkah, once safe for her father, became dangerous. Neighbors and relatives spoke harshly of him, and the air around their home carried the tension of a brewing storm. One of the earliest and most vivid memories of Fatima was the day she saw her father being mocked and humiliated near the Kaaba. The Quraysh leaders, in their arrogance, placed the filthy remains of a slaughtered camel on his back while he was in prostration. The crowd laughed cruelly, but Fatima, a small girl, ran forward through the jeers of grown men and removed the filth from her father's shoulders. Tears filled her eyes as she comforted him, and he gently reassured her. This act, simple yet profound, showed the depth of her love and loyalty even at such a young age. It was a moment that revealed her courage, and the purity of her heart. Life in Makkah became increasingly difficult for the believers. The Quraysh mocked them in public, harmed them in secret, and spread lies about them. For Fatima, every day was a lesson in patience. She watched her father return home with dust in his hair and wounds on his body, yet he never complained. She saw her mother spend long nights in prayer, asking Allah to protect the family. The home of Muhammad and Khadija, became a place of refuge for the early Muslims, who often gathered there to recite the Quran in secret and strengthen each other's faith. Fatima, though young, absorbed every word and every act of devotion. Her understanding of Islam grew not from formal lessons, but from living in the presence of the Prophet himself. When the Quraysh saw that insults and threats could not stop Muhammad they tried to pressure him through his family. They would taunt the daughters of the Prophet in the streets, calling them names and trying to shame them. Fatima, still a young girl, faced this cruelty with remarkable composure. She did not respond with anger but carried herself with the dignity she learned from her parents. It was during these years that she became known among the believers as Zahra, the Shining One, because her face would seem to glow with light, especially when she was in prayer or in the company of her father. Her bond with her father was unique. Whenever he returned home, she would rise to greet him, kiss his hand, and welcome him warmly. The Prophet loved her deeply, often calling her by affectionate names and showing her a level of respect rare in that time for daughters. He would stand up when she entered the room and seat her beside him. This love was mutual, for Fatima could not bear to see him hurt or distressed. She became his comfort in times of sadness, earning the title Abiha, the mother of her father, because of the care and affection she gave him. The years passed, and the hostility of the Quraysh grew harsher. When Fatima was still young, the Muslims faced one of their greatest trials, the social boycott. The Quraysh forced the believers, along with the family of the Prophet, into a narrow valley called Shib Abi Talib. There, they were cut off from trade and social contact. For 3 years, they endured hunger and thirst, often surviving on leaves and water alone. Fatima witnessed the suffering of her family, the cries of hungry children, and the steadfastness of the believers. These experiences shaped her into a woman of patience and unshakable faith, even in those harsh conditions. Fatima continued to support her parents in every way she could. She would help gather what little food they could find, comfort the younger children, and tend to the sick. Her character was already showing the qualities that would define her life: compassion, endurance, and deep trust in Allah's plan. She learned that faith was not only about prayer and belief, but also about standing firm when trials came, about helping others even when one had little to give. By the time the boycott ended, Fatima had grown from a child into a young woman whose heart was full of wisdom far beyond her age. She had seen the cruelty of those who opposed the truth, but she had also seen the strength of those who held firmly to their faith. The years ahead would bring even more trials, but also moments of joy and honor. In her heart, she carried the lessons of her early life, that dignity comes from serving Allah, that patience is the key to endurance, and that love for family and faith is worth every sacrifice. This was the foundation upon which the rest of her life would be built. A life that would leave an everlasting example for the entire Ummah. The little girl who once ran to wipe the filth from her father's back would grow into the woman whom the Prophet called the leader of the women of paradise, a woman whose story continues to inspire every believer who seeks strength in times of hardship. The years of hardship and migration, the years that followed, were marked by some of the most painful and testing moments in the life of Fatima bint Muhammad. Though still young, she was no stranger to hardship. Her childhood had been shaped by the struggles of her father's mission and the hostility of the Quraysh, but the events that came next would test her patience and strength more than ever before. The boycott in the valley of Abu Talib had ended, but the effects lingered. The believers returned to Makkah weary and weakened, their bodies thin from hunger and their hearts carrying the scars of years of isolation. For Fatima, the suffering of those years was not only physical, but also emotional. As she had watched her parents endure endless trials with dignity, it was not long after their return from the valley that tragedy struck. In a single year, Fatima would lose two of the most important people in her life. First came the passing of Abu Talib, the Prophet's uncle and protector. Though Abu Talib had never accepted Islam, his support and influence had shielded the Prophet from much of the violence of the Quraysh. His death left Muhammad exposed to greater danger than ever before. Not long after, the second blow came with the loss of Khadija bint Khuwaylid, the mother of Fatima and the first believer in Islam. Khadija had been the Prophet's greatest source of comfort and support, a woman who stood by him through every hardship. Her death left a deep emptiness in the home, and for Fatima, it was as if the very heart of her family had been taken away. Fatima was still a young woman, but she felt the weight of responsibility. With her mother gone, she took on the role of caring for her father in every way she could. She kept the home in order, prepared his food, and was always there to greet him when he returned. Her love and care for him only deepened during this time. She understood the pain he carried and tried to ease it with her presence and words. It was during these years that her title Abiha, the mother of her father, became more meaningful. Than ever, the hostility of the Quraysh reached a new level. Without Abu Talib's protection, the Prophet faced open insults and even physical attacks in the streets of Makkah. Fatima often saw him return home with wounds and dust on his face, and she would tend to him with gentleness and patience. Despite the danger, she never wavered in her support for him or in her commitment to Islam. Her faith had been forged in the fires of hardship, and every new trial only made it stronger. Then came a turning point. The command of Allah was given for the believers to migrate to Medina. This migration, known as the Hijra, was not an easy decision. It meant leaving behind their homes, their possessions, and in many cases, their families. But it was necessary for the safety of the Muslims and the future of Islam. Fatima, still in Mecca at the time, stayed with her father until the final arrangements for their journey could be made. When the time came, she traveled to Medina, where the believers welcomed her with open arms. The city became a place of safety and new beginnings for the Muslims. It was in Medina that Fatima's life entered a new chapter. Soon after her arrival, her to say Subhanallah 33 times, Alhamdulillah 33 times, and Allahu Akbar 34 times before sleeping, as this would be better for her than a servant. Fatima took his advice to heart and made it a habit throughout her life. This simple act of dhikr became known as the Tasbih of Fatima, and is still practiced by Muslims today as a means of finding strength and peace as the years passed. Fatima gave birth to 2 daughters, Zainab and Kulthum. Like their brothers, they were raised with love and taught the values of faith, humility, and service to others. Fatima's home became a place of learning and spiritual growth, where the Quran was recited daily and acts of worship were central to life. Her children grew up with the example of a mother who lived for Allah and who saw every challenge as an opportunity to draw closer to Him. Though her life was marked by struggle, Fatima's heart remained content. She understood that true richness was not in wealth but in the remembrance of Allah and in the love of family and faith. The people of Medina admired her for her piety, her humility, and her willingness to help others. She was known to speak little but with wisdom, and her words carried weight because they came from a heart that was sincere. Fatima's devotion to her father and her faith was evident in every aspect of her life. She had grown from the young girl who comforted her father in the streets of Makkah to a woman whose strength and piety inspired all who knew her. She was a mother raising the next generation of leaders, a wife supporting one of the greatest companions of the Prophet, and a believer whose trust in Allah never wavered. Her life in Medina was a living example of the balance between family responsibilities and dedication to worship and service. This balance, achieved through patience and sincerity, would remain one of the greatest lessons she left for the Ummah. Final days and her legacy, the later years of Fatima bint Muhammad's life, were filled with moments of both deep sorrow and lasting honor. She had endured years of hardship, served her family with love, and stood beside her father through every trial of his mission. But as the Muslim community grew stronger in Madinah, a shadow fell over her heart, for she sensed that her beloved father's time on earth was coming to an end. The Prophet Muhammad's mission had been fulfilled, and the message of Islam had spread far and wide, but the thought of losing him was almost unbearable for Fatima. She had been by his side since childhood, through the days of insults in Makkah, the hunger of the boycott, the trials of migration, and the challenges of building a new community. The bond they shared was unlike any other, and she could not imagine life without him. It was in the 11th year after the Hijrah, when signs of the Prophet's final illness began to appear. His health weakened, yet he continued to lead the believers with patience and strength. Fatima visited him often, her heart heavy with worry. She would sit beside him, listen to his gentle words, and try to comfort him in his moments of pain. One day, during his illness, she entered his room, and he welcomed her with his usual warmth. He whispered something in her ear that made her eyes fill with tears, and then he whispered again, and she smiled. Later she explained that in the first whisper, he had told her that he would soon pass away, and in the second, he told her that she would be the first of his family to join him. Her tears were from the sorrow of losing him, and her smile was from the comfort of knowing they would be reunited soon in his final days. The Prophet continued to show his love for Fatima. He called her the leader of the women of paradise, and reminded the believers of her honor and virtue. When he passed away, the grief that filled Fatima's heart was immense. She mourned deeply, feeling the loss of not just a father but also the messenger of Allah, the man whose presence had been the guiding light of her entire life. She was patient, knowing that this was the will of Allah, but the emptiness she felt was unlike any pain she had known before. After his passing, Fatima's health began to decline. The sorrow she carried seemed to weigh heavily on her body as well as her heart. Yet in those months, she continued to fulfill her duties as a wife and mother, caring for her children and supporting her husband, Ali, in his responsibilities. She spoke little and kept her focus on her worship, spending long hours in prayer and remembrance of Allah. Her world had changed forever, but her faith remained unshaken. During this time, she also faced the challenges of life after the Prophet. Matters of leadership and inheritance arose, and though she spoke for her rights, she did so with dignity and without compromising the unity of the Muslim community. Her primary concern was always to preserve the values her father had taught, and to live in a way that honored his memory. She was steadfast in her humility, never seeking worldly gain, and always keeping her focus on the eternal reward promised by Allah. Fatima's time after the Prophet's passing was short. True to his words, she did not live long without him. Just 6 months after his death, her own health failed. She prepared herself for the meeting with Allah with complete submission to his will. She asked for her burial to be done quietly and modestly, and she wished to be buried at night so that her resting place would be peaceful. Her requests reflected the same humility and modesty that had defined her entire life. When the time came, Ali ibn Abi Talib was overcome with grief. He washed her body with the help of Fatima bint wrapped her in a simple shroud, and offered the funeral prayer. She was buried in the darkness of night, as she had wished. The exact location of her grave remains unknown, which has only added to the sense of reverence and mystery surrounding her life. Her departure was mourned by the entire Muslim community, for they knew that they had lost one of the purest and most beloved women in history. Fatima's legacy was not in wealth or power, but in the example she left for all who came after her. She embodied the qualities of patience, devotion, generosity, and humility. She was a loving daughter, a faithful wife, a caring mother, and a devoted servant of Allah. Her life was a living testimony to the values of Islam, and her name became a symbol of purity and righteousness for generations of Muslims. The Prophet's words that she was the leader of the women of paradise remain a reminder of her unmatched status in the sight of Allah. Her children carried forward her legacy in powerful ways. Hassan and Hussein became central figures in the history of Islam, known for their courage, piety, and dedication to truth. Her daughters Zainab and Kulthum also grew into women of strength and faith, playing important roles in preserving and teaching the message of Islam. Through them, the influence of Fatima's upbringing and values spread across the Muslim world, touching countless lives for the believers. The story of Fatima bint Muhammad is not just a tale from the past, but a source of guidance and inspiration. Her life teaches that true honor comes from faith, that dignity is preserved through patience, and that the love of Allah is the greatest treasure one can possess. Her example shows that even in the face of hardship, one can live with grace, humility, and unwavering devotion. She remains a shining light for all who seek to live a life of righteousness, and her memory continues to be honored in every corner of the Muslim Ummah. Remembering her, we are reminded of the simple yet profound truth that the measure of a person is not in the comfort they enjoy, but in the sacrifices they make for the sake of what is right. Fatima's sacrifices were many, but her reward is eternal. She walked a path filled with trials, yet every step was taken with trust in Allah, and every challenge was met with the strength of her faith. Her story is a timeless reminder that the greatest legacy we can leave is a life lived in service to Allah and in love for His Messenger. And so, the life of Fatima bint Muhammad came to a close, but her light has never dimmed. It continues to shine in the hearts of those who remember her, inspiring them to live with the same purity, devotion, and courage that she showed in every moment of her life. Her story is one that will be told for as long as there are believers. A story that will forever hold a place among the most honored in the history of Islam. The end.